panelists. This is on Jainism in dialogue with Hinduism, by the way, this next panel. So we're talking about Jainism in dialogue with Hinduism. And our first panelist is Professor Jeffery D. Long, who's the professor of religion, philosophy, and Asian studies at Elizabethtown College. And the title of his presentation is Beyond Philosophy, the Experiential Basis of Anekāntavāda and Dharmasamanvaya. We welcome you, Professor Long, once again to Arihanta Institute to hear your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jejinendra, and thank you for including me in this conference. I'm very grateful to be here. I will start sharing my presentation, so hopefully everyone can see my screen now. So is that visible? Okay, very good. So yes, I'm calling this Beyond Philosophy, the Experiential Bases of Anekāntavāda and Dharmasamanvaya. So the comparative theological conversation here is between the Jain tradition, specifically the idea of Anekāntavāda, which is our main focus in this conference, and with the tradition of Sri Ramakrishna, often identified as a Hindu tradition for good reasons, and specifically its teaching of Dharmasamanvaya. So bringing these together. And I'm going to start off a tiny bit autobiographically. I hope no one minds that. But we've already in the previous panel talked about what comparative theology is, what we mean by this. And of course, Frank Clooney is a very prominent voice, the most prominent voice, I think, in this field. And but I think it's worth looking at his definition of this term. He says it is comparative and theological from beginning to end, meaning it marks acts of faith, seeking understanding, classic Christian definition of theology. But again, faith can mean, of course, many types of faith. Faith seeking understanding that is rooted in a particular faith tradition, but which from that foundation, these acts venture into learning from one or more other faith traditions. This learning is sought for the sake of fresh theological insights that are indebted to the newly encountered tradition or traditions, as well as the home tradition, the tradition with which the comparative theologian might identify. Of course, it's possible for people to identify with more than one tradition. There are a lot of various kinds of questions and ways that we could kind of push the boundaries of this definition. But essentially, we're talking about someone who has a specific worldview, engaging deeply with another worldview in order to learn, in order to expand their understanding. So, again, I'm bringing together Anekāntavāda and Dharmasamanvaya. In Clooney's terms, my home tradition is the Vedānta tradition of Sri Ramakrishna, the Holy Mother Sharada Devi, and Swami Vivekananda, known variously as Vijnana Vedanta or Integral Vedanta. This is a relatively recent Vedanta tradition. Sri Ramakrishna lived in the 19th century. It taps into and has numerous affinities with earlier forms of Vedanta, as well as with a variety of other traditions. These are all synthesized and brought together in the teaching and in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. So the tradition from which I seek to learn is, of course, the Jain tradition. Specifically, I want to bring my home tradition's teaching of Dharmasamanvaya, which is usually translated as harmony of religions, into dialogue with Anekāntavāda, the Jain teaching of the complex nature of reality. My thesis is that both of these teachings are rooted in experience. That is, they point beyond the merely conceptual realm to a direct encounter with the multifaceted nature of reality as revealed in our experience. I'm emphasizing experience for a number of reasons. One frequently encounters in a variety of traditions the claim that reason, while useful in many respects, is ultimately limited. That what we are aiming to achieve in whichever tradition we are practicing is typically not the right answer or the correct conceptual formulation, but it's something far more transformative and far more engaged with the entire person, including the intellect, but definitely not limited to it. And I think these two teachings, in distinct ways, point us back to the realm of experience. Dharmasamanvaya is rooted in Sri Ramakrishna's very unusual experience of realization through many paths. Ramakrishna famously claimed that he had achieved a very profound state, the highest state of spiritual realization, and had done so by practicing many different traditions. He famously practiced a variety of different Hindu sadhanas and practices, as well as engaging with Christianity and with Islam. His knowledge of the Jain tradition, I think, was very limited, almost non-existent. But the fact that through his experiential method he arrived at a conclusion, which I think is strikingly similar to Anekāntavāda, actually strengthens, you could say, the case for Anekāntavāda, right? Because when we think of the model of the physical sciences, right? If people experimenting and doing observations and doing tests and so on, independent of one another, come to the same conclusion, it supports the idea that that conclusion is correct, and it's interesting to see a convergence here of what in many ways are quite distinct traditions. Of course, as a Hindu tradition, Ramakrishna's tradition is deeply rooted in many of the same concepts we find in the Jain tradition, right? As Indic traditions, we see them conversing in terms of karma and rebirth and certain types of sadhana, meditative practice that are aimed at the transformation of consciousness. But they also have some interesting and important differences, and yet there is a kind of convergence here. Anekāntavāda is rooted in Bhagavan Mahavira's experience of absolute knowledge, Keval Jnana, as well as in the common experience of reality as multifaceted. What am I talking about here? I really liked the conversation, the discussion in the last panel about the role that Mahavir's omniscience plays, and not just Mahavira, all the jinnas, omniscience plays in the discourse of Anekāntavāda, because Anekāntavāda is not a kind of skeptical relativism that says, well, your view is as good as my view because none of us really know, right? That's kind of a modern skeptical relativism that you see. No, it's a much stronger affirmation that relativity is layered into the nature of existence, that our relationship to reality, especially given the fact that till liberation we're bearing various kinds of karmas, various kinds of obstructions, that we are able to observe reality on a collective level, you could say, from a wide range of vantage points, which drawn together could be seen as cohering into a larger reality, even if our individual claims may seem to conflict. And so this is rooted in conceptually in the vision of omniscience, and omniscience acts as I often use this the term limit concept to talk about that, right? That it's something that anchors this vision of many perspectives into an ultimate view of the nature of existence, which is not simply a view among other views, but which is positioned, as it were, as the kind of transcendental condition of having any view. Uh, I don't have time to delve into this in very great depth, but in the Jain tradition, I think one particular thinker who is very productive in this regard to engage with is the Kunda Kunda Acharya from the Digamra tradition, who talks about the ultimate perspective, the Nishcayana, the perspective of the omniscient being, but he doesn't identify it with a doctrine or a verbal formulation. It is the experience of the inherent nature of the jiva itself. And then beneath that, in a sense, you could say, is the relative realm of speech, where he would say that Kunda Kunda would say that the Jain tradition has a privileged place because of the breadth and depth of its vision, but that it's still in the realm of words and concepts. So it is not, even Jain teaching is not ultimate truth, right? It is still relative truth. It may be seen as the highest relative truth in the tradition, but it is still relative truth. Anyway, the project itself that I'm doing is also rooted in experience, my own much more humble experience than those of Sri Ramakrishna or Bhagavan Mahavira, of deep learning across religious borders, of engaging with and encountering multiple traditions and finding things that were wise and beautiful and transformative in all of them. And so this multiplicity of approaches is something that resonates deeply with and affirms my own experience. My starting point and background is that I come originally from a Christian background, Roman Catholic background in rural America. And tragedies that I experienced early in life sparked a journey that led me ultimately to the tradition of Sri Ramakrishna. And I've got some pictures here that are just sort of code for my background. There's the Catholic church I grew up attending, Immaculate Conception Parish in Montgomery City, Missouri. There's a photo of Mahatma Gandhi, whose teachings I encountered when the Richard Attenborough film Gandhi came out, and I saw it as a 13-year-old. And that led very soon to my reading the Bhagavad Gita. The first version I read was the ISKCON, the Hare Krishna version by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada as the commentator. There you've got George Harrison's album, All Things Must Pass, his first venture outside the Beatles, and his engagement with Indian spirituality. All these things sort of pulled me into the direction and finally toward the tradition where I am today. One of the teachings that drew me most strongly to Vedanta was its teaching of the harmony of religions. Um, I first countered this idea, in fact, in a book of teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. And he says religions are different roads converging on the same point. What does it matter that we take different roads so long as we reach the same goal? In reality, there are as many religions as there are individuals. I believe in the fundamental truth of all great religions of the world. I believe that they're all God-given, and I believe they were necessary for the people to whom these religions were revealed. And I believe that if only we could all of us read the scriptures of different faiths from the standpoint of the followers of those faiths, we should find that they were at bottom all one and were all helpful to one another. And Gandhi is here echoing Ramakrishna, for whom he had a very high regard. Ramakrishna was one of many influences on Gandhi. Gandhi once said that one who has seen Ramakrishna has seen the face of God. So he regarded Ramakrishna very highly. And what does Ramakrishna say? He says that I have practiced all religions. Really not all, but all the religions that were in his environment. And I've also followed the paths of the different Hindu sects. I have found that it is the same God toward whom all are directing their steps, though all along different paths. He who is called Krishna is also called Shiva and bears the name of the primal energy, Jesus and Allah as well, the same Rama with 1,000 names. And he also says it's not good to feel that one's religion is true and all others are false. God is one, not two. Different people call him by different names. Some as Allah, some as God, and others as Krishna, Shiva, and Brahman. It is like water in a lake. Some drink it at one place and call it jal. Others at another place call it pani, and still others at a third place call it water. The Hindus call it jal, the Christians call it water, the Muslims pani, but it is one and the same thing. Opinions are but paths. Each religion is only a path leading to God. As rivers come from different directions and ultimately become one in the ocean, all religions and all paths call upon their followers to pray to one and the same God. Therefore, one should not show disrespect to any religion or religious opinion. Now, in a discussion of the Jain tradition, Ramakrishna's God language can be jarring until we look at how he actually uses this term, not only in this quotation, but in various places throughout the writings we have that preserve his teachings. He didn't actually write, others wrote down what he discussed. But this term God, he's using the Bengali term Ishwar. It is for Sri Ramakrishna a placeholder for ultimate reality. And based on my understanding of his teaching and of the tradition that has developed around him, the Jain concept of the jiva as ultimate reality, I think would be very much in place here. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna speaks of another tradition with many affinities to the Jain tradition. He was very aware of the yoga tradition. He says, to the yogis, the divinity is the soul within. And then he speaks of how to the Brahmins it is the infinite Brahman, to the devotees it is the personal God. So this word God, and again, I think rather as with the word theology, if we're going to use it in this interreligious context, we have to uproot it to some extent from concepts like a creator or even an omnipotent being. But that we are really speaking of a kind of ultimate reality. In fact, John Hick made this move as well. He started talking early in his career in terms of a theocentric, then moved from cosmocentric and finally to reality-centric understanding. What Ramakrishna is saying here is that we are all seeking that highest transformative reality, each in our varied ways, but that in his experience, if one follows any of these paths, one has that transformative experience if one follows that path with complete single-minded devotion. This was a view that again, I was very drawn to. I found it a profound contrast with a lot of what I encountered, especially growing up Catholic in Missouri. I remember being told I was going to hell at a very early age because I was Catholic. And then when my interlocutors found out not only was I Catholic, but I was reading about Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism and all of these things, then they knew I was going to hell, right? They absolutely thought that there was something wrong with me. And this didn't seem to me to be consistent with what I took to be the higher teaching of any of the traditions. And this idea of harmony of religions resonated far more. The picture here is of University of Chicago, where I ended up doing my graduate degree, and that's really where I began my studies of the Jain tradition in earnest. My goal was to articulate we could call it either theological or philosophical defense of the idea of harmony of religions, Dharmasamanvaya. The term you see more often in Western philosophical discourse is religious pluralism. But at that time, this is in the 90s, Sri Ramakrishna was seen among many scholars really as more of a figure of interest to psychologists and phenomenologists of religion, right? They were interested in him because of all these incredible states of consciousness and these sort of altered states of awareness that he described and experienced. And he wasn't really treated as a serious philosopher. That has thankfully changed, and I would say mainly due to the work of a scholar monk in the Ramakrishna order named Swami Vedānanda, who's done some wonderful work establishing that there is a philosophical, very clear set of philosophical ideas operating in Ramakrishna's teaching. But I won't say that anyone actively discouraged me, but I had a very clear sense that it would have been an uphill battle to say, well, I'm going to be talking about Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy of religion. Right? And I know there were scholars at the time who would say Sri Ramakrishna has no philosophy of religion. So what was I to do? My situation actually turned out to be quite fortuitous because it actually pushed me to seek other sources for arguing for my position. So I said, okay, I'm a practitioner in this tradition, but I'm not going to research Swami Vivekananda or Sri Ramakrishna. I'm going to look into other sources. And again, rather like in the physical sciences, see, has anyone else come to this conclusion? And my search led me both to the process philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead, which is a topic for another conversation, but also to Jain thought. And I found it in this wonderful book by Bimal Krishna Motilal, Logic, Language, and Reality. And that's where I first encountered Anekāntavāda. And it was in this paragraph in page 301 of this book, of this edition. Motilal says the Anekānta philosophy, in fact, amounts to a philosophy of synthesis, an integrated approach to the ontological problems. Conflicting philosophic theories are treated by Jainism as viewing the same reality from different points of view. A thing has infinite-fold character, and hence the philosophic truth can be grasped only by integrating and synthesizing all the viewpoints or standpoints. Well, I read this and I said, oh my goodness, this is it. This is exactly what I'm looking for, right? The idea of Anekāntavāda lends to the tradition of Sri Ramakrishna, if we engage in this comparative theological discourse, a vocabulary for speaking of reality, as in Motilal's words, infinite fold, and moreover of doing so in a logically rigorous fashion. Sri Ramakrishna, he's certainly a philosopher in the broad sense, but he was not about offering logical arguments. All his teaching was much more spontaneous and charismatic, right? To use a term that Professor Barbato used a little while ago. It was left to others, right, in the tradition to try to turn it into something systematic. But the Jain tradition has already been doing this for many, many centuries, and it does this through its related concept of Syadvada and its system of sevenfold predication, according to which a given truth claim can be seen as, in some sense, true, in some sense, false, in some sense, both true and false, in some senses pointing to an experiential realm beyond description, indescribable. And then there are the three additional senses that are derived from the non-redundant combinations of those four. And with this, you can see that claims that appear to be directly opposed can, in fact, be seen as describing different facets of a complex reality. Of course, we have our famous, beloved example of the blind people and the elephant. And some of you have seen this somewhat more modern one that I like to use. This is the Crab Nebula photographed through different wavelengths of light. These photos are all different, but they are of the same object. Not one of them is the right picture, right? This is like what Dr. Mehta was talking about with the pictures of the goddess. Which one is the correct one? Well, they're both correct. None of these captures the total reality of the Crab Nebula. They each capture a partial reality, but they all are beautiful and they all tell us something, right? And so if we bring Sri Ramakrishna's discourse into conversation with Anekāntavāda, what do we see? Although Sri Ramakrishna was not directly influenced by Jain thought, he arrived at a similar concept of the inherent diversity of phenomenal reality through his practices of many sādhanas, many spiritual disciplines rooted in many traditions. No system of thought is absolutely true or absolutely false. All rather are true, but incompletely so. And of course, left to us to see how they can be brought together. A system of thought needs to be put into practice in order to experience reality through the medium which it provides. And this again gets me back to my point that finally, all of these worldviews are ultimately maps of experience. Both Bhagwan Mahavira and Sri Ramakrishna, through their respective experiences of realization, affirm a reality that can be conceptualized and approached in a vast variety of ways. And this message is vitally important in a world in which diverse conceptualizations of reality are all too often used as justifications for violence and as tools for dividing humanity against itself. Dharmasamanvaya and Anekāntavāda both point to the possibility of a world beyond such conflict. I meant to write here. I didn't know such complex. Complex is good. Conflict, not so much. World beyond such conflict in which infinite paths to reality can coexist. There's much more that can be said. I think in some sense I've given a bit of a superficial presentation, but I wanted to give the big overview of really what has ultimately been my life's intellectual project. And, if anyone wants to hear more detail or depth about any of it, open to that. But I think I'm a minute over my time, so I now yield.
Thank you, Professor Long, and we enjoyed so much listening to your presentation. We're going to come back to that in the discussion.